All right, I think I am streaming everywhere. I had to check that a little bit. Let's get this going. Sorry about that. Good to see you guys. Not my car. That's somebody on you. I'm just a pirate, you know. I like the sound of it. I'm sorry to disappoint again. It's definitely not my car. I do have a very nice motorcycle, though, that's going to come out of the garage in a couple short weeks, I think. Eagles and spiders and cats and ducks so far today. Eagles, spiders, cats, and ducks, as well as a garden variety human. That's not too bad.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario.
Mr. Sparkle was really good. There were some questions afterward that we didn't get to that were also very good, but essentially all the same stuff that we've been saying. And so it was really nice to get some confirmation that he's still out there, but he sounds worn out. He sounds tired, and so we need to pick it up. We need to pick it up.
I think truth is good for kids. We're so busy lying, we don't even recognize the truth no more in society. We want everybody to feel good. That's not the way life is.
But you can tell if someone's lying. You know, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie.
It's spring, though.
I don't think I'm a liar.
It's spring, so we don't have to be worn down. We can get energy from the sun and from outside again.
Not to be a liar.
We got to do that. We got to do that. I missed my cue there, but we do have to do that. We have to get outside. We have to find energy. We have to find our spirituality again. We have to find connection with, we do need to get our energy up because it's going to get worse, not better. At least I expected to. I'm not saying I know, and I certainly don't hope. If they elect Bobby and end the vaccine schedule by January next year, I'm fine with that.
Follow my instructions. Keep it clean. Touch gloves if you wish. Let's do it.
Sweaty palms.
This is so crazy. Like goosebumps. This is so crazy. I feel so nervous. Like, what in the world, man?
Ladies and gentlemen, another show at around 1:13. I'm always almost ready, and then I decide to add a slide or rearrange something, and then I ended up starting at 20 after again. But I am going to get on time, and I am certainly going to stay committed to this exact time window because it works really well in my energy space. It works really well with my family, and so I want to keep working. And this would probably also be the place where we do any. Oh wow! Did I just over advance that? If you are joining me for the first time, you might be a skilled TV watcher, a skilled social media user. But here at Gigaohm Biological, we stay focused on the biology. We don't take the bait on TV and social media, and we love our neighbors. The way it works is that people have been sharing my work for about 4 years now. And even after all that sharing, I still don't really have I still don't really have that many followers because, again, I don't have the artificial amplification that a lot of other people do. And so, you know, we do the best we can. But whatever we have is very organic and it's very real. The 38 people that are watching right now are very real. The 3,000 some odd followers that I have on Twitch are very real. And the views that we're getting now on the PeerTube are also very real. You can find me at GigaOhmBiological.com, where you can also find links to support my work. It would be very much appreciated by me and my family if you did that. You can find ways to communicate with me at gigaohm.bio, and you can watch this stream, including new archive of it, at stream.gigaohm.bio. That's all new stuff that we're trying to do to get our stuff algorithm free. You know, I am on YouTube and Rumble and other places, but wouldn't it be great if we didn't use any of those things? That's kind of my idea, that we should have a federated social media that's decentralized, unregulatable, and certainly if there's any algorithm, it should have a lot of knobs that we can turn to control what we want to listen to, what we want to, you know, who we want to listen to. And I think a lot of these people that have put their name and their reputation on the line to support Gigaohm Biological are into the same thing. The idea that we shouldn't be a slave to the YouTube, we shouldn't be the slave to whatever images are shown to us on Twitter, which I'm absolutely becoming convinced is one of the worst manifestations of the intellectual dark web. That being the internet that tries to trap you, the internet that traps your consciousness, that gives you a false sense of a window into reality around the world. It sounds really good, doesn't it? That you got this little thing in your hand and you can see information from all over the world, real people from all over the world, and we're connected more than we've ever been. But in reality, that's probably almost exclusively an illusion, and it's an illusion created by them. And so I am trying to start a trend and get people to think more independently of themselves, the work that they do, and how to put it out there, so that, you know, if my work's good enough, then people are going to find PeerTube, people are going to find gigaohm.bio, and people are going to find gigaohmbiological.com. And we're not going to need to have videos that are on YouTube. We're not going to have to share YouTube links. We're not going to have to tweet anymore, because people will see this as valuable enough. At least that's what we're hoping for. And in the meantime, we have people like Sooth Spider in the chat that is sharing a lot of this stuff, trying to make it more doable for other people to try and share it, which is, again, one of the primary ways that this works. Again, it's an illusion that's sustained through everyone's participation. So if we can spread this word organically, then every person that we pull out of the cave is never going to go back in. And that's really the trick, is that we don't want to be a flash in the pan. Gigaohm Biological does not want to be a flash in the pan. We want to be something that ends up being actually, no, like that. Ends up being something that I don't know, leaves a mark on history, if you will, and not me, but the whole thing that's happening here, the thing that is Jessica Hockett and is Jonathan Engler and Martin Neal and maybe Denny Rancour and Mark Kulak and all these people who are working very independently, doing what they believe is right, admitting mistakes, admitting wrong directions, admitting, you know, and just trying to find the truth that we feel comfortable passing on to our children, because that's the last part of that that's so important to understand. They want us to pass along a version of reality that is almost exclusively mythology. They want us to pass that on to our children so that they can be governed by stories that they don't understand, that don't even need to be congruent, because they are counting on us not to turn to our children and say whatever they say you experiencing right now and in the past 4 years is not true. We made a huge mistake. We should have never allowed you to go back to school with masks on. We should have These are the kinds of things I repeat because I think it is the way out. I'm starting to think about whether or not I need to ride my motorcycle to the University of Pittsburgh campus and just sit there next to my motorcycle and interview people about what they think happened and what they think is happening, to get an idea of what the average college kid at the University of Pittsburgh is currently dialed in on. Because I think we would find it quite frightening. And I think the most frightening aspect of it would be is how willing the vast majority of the students that we would encounter there, how willing they would be to go right back to 2020 lockdown style with testing and an expectation of improved fidelity in testing or approved availability in testing, but they would all be willing to go with it. And so we need to help them realize that that is a place they don't want to be, they don't need to be, that they're there because of a mythology that we weren't quick enough to dispel. And that includes me. That's why that link on Gigaohm Biological is there that's titled Scooby. And that everybody just ignores. All the people that want to take me down just ignore that. That's the perfect place, right? Just, look, he said he was wrong. But they don't do that because what that means also is that they need to acknowledge what I was wrong about. They need to talk about the biology there. And that's the stuff that they cannot have get out. The stuff that maybe Denny Rancor is right, and there wasn't a particularly novel virus circulating around because we can't see a signal for it. And that the only really discernible signals that we see are from the rollout of transfection. Mike Eden hit on something really important at the end of the questioning that we didn't cover yesterday, where he said what I've been saying for 3 years now, and that is that they rolled out the adenovirus probably knowing full well that it wouldn't work that well, and knowing full well that even if it did work as well as the mRNA, they were going to use it as a scapegoat. They had Jesse Gelsinger, they had all the reasons to believe that the adenovirus would work, but it wouldn't be the way forward. They weren't planning to use adenovirus with DNA in it or adenovirus with even RNA in it. They weren't planning to use, I don't think it's RNA, I think it can only be DNA, but I'm not a virologist, so that I could be wrong on that little detail. But the point is, I am pretty sure that adenovirus as a vector for genetic therapy, as a vector for transfection in the big realm of medicine was never really a long-term plan. They knew that, but they needed to produce that countermeasure and to produce it in such a way, even release it chronologically faster, so that in the timeline of things, the early adopters would adopt it. It would be okay. Some of them would be ill. And then they could say, well, look, we see this safety signal here, so we're going to pull these shots. And as Mike Eden and I have said for 3 or 4 years now, well, we didn't say it then, but we have been saying it for a couple years now, and I'm sure that I said this very early on, back when they were publishing these Nature papers where they were showing our understanding of RNA and our understanding of lipid nanoparticles kind of evolving in time together as if they were always meant to be. This same kind of argument that transfection is just this inevitably wonderful technology that's just coming into its own, was being laid down even as the shots were being rolled out, to kind of give this people the impression and make sure you understood that this was it was a technology that had reached its time. And so they already knew that the adenovirus was going to be a sacrificial lamb. Mike Eden describes it very perfectly as that. And so that's where we are. We are at a stage where we've been on our couch for 4 years. We've been watching the wrong people on social media argue about the wrong things, and more importantly, trying to answer the wrong questions and getting us to think about how to answer the wrong questions. And that gets you to accept the model implied by the questions. And so I keep stating this over and over because I think it's really important. This is an idea from the 20s. This is a quote from Edward Bernays, and it is a stolen slide and quote basically from my friend Vera Sharav, who's given many talks about how information and its falseness are used to govern us. False information and arguing about it. It's the perfect way to do it. And it's extraordinarily simple once you see it. Because now you just need to insert people with opposing opinions that are very good at arguing and very articulate, or, capable of sounding very thoughtful and intelligent. And you get them to take opposing views, and then you promote them, not with an AI, with some magic algorithm we don't understand, but with very simple programming. And you game social media to promote these opposing views that are already under your control and are never going to encroach on the things, on the real reality, but are going to sustain the mythology by which people are being governed. And we are being bamboozled by these people. And to what extent they know they're playing a role in this, I don't know. But it's becoming more and more apparent to me that is how the principle of informed consent has been completely obliterated. You can't exercise informed consent if you have no clue what's happening. You don't understand your world at all.
Scientific questions, I think, are very hard to get a handle on. And the reason for this is that in late modernity, which we're living in, there's simply too much knowledge for any individual human to understand all of it. And so, and so in this world of extreme hyper specialization, where it's narrower and narrower subsets of experts policing themselves and talking about how great they are, the string theorists talking about how great string theory is, the cancer researchers talking about how they're just about to cure cancer, the quantum computer researchers are just about to build, a quantum computer that will be a massive breakthrough. And then if you were to say that all these fields, not much is happening, people just don't have the authority for this. And this is somehow a very different feel for science or knowledge than you would have had in 1800 or even in 1900. In 1800, Goethe could still understand just about everything.
Right.
1900, Hilbert could still understand just about all of mathematics. And so this sort of specialization,
it's interesting.
I think, has made it a much harder question to get a handle on.
It's interesting. He's not smuggling anything under that shirt other than a fat beer belly. It's interesting because he's also obfuscating the fact that there were a lot more scholars at that time that could understand most everything, and that were, pushing that cutting edge, because that was almost exclusively in-person discussion and letter, and correspondence. So it's strange in multiple ways, but I've explained it yesterday. I'll explain it again. One really good place where I've discussed this, I think, pretty accurately is when I interviewed with Wolfgang Wodach. But what you have here is somebody who's calling knowledge, and it's calling it knowledge, and it's not knowledge. And the reason why it's not knowledge is because Popperian reiterative science, where you're falsifying hypotheses, has been used to basically obliterate science and academic science as it uses probability in place of, some kind of, let's say validation of models. We have been bamboozled. And what he's describing is that there's so much of this that we can't understand anymore what's going on, but that's by design. And it's not by happenstance. It's not by mistake. It's not because everybody doesn't get it. It's by design. And you have to be a certain level of aware in order for that design to become obvious. And I was in there for years and never saw it. I could feel that cancer biology was kind of nonsense. I could feel that the genetic causes of autism was a pretty weird thing to put so much money into. I could feel those incongruencies, but I didn't understand how using p-values and null hypotheses as straw men, you can create whole fields. I didn't understand how using p-values and null hypothesis straw men, You could create whole models of the universe that make predictions that will never validate, and then test those models or pretend to test those models for years, which is what he's basically talking about with regard to string theory or quantum computing. And quite frankly, I think there are a lot of things about genetics and medicine that we have been bamboozled about, that we have been misled about the fidelity and depth of our understanding, with the hopes that we never question it, so that we can be governed by this simple mythology that, you know, DNA and then RNA and then protein. And so all we got to do is read the DNA and figure out, you know, what's good and bad and sort out that stuff, and then we can fix it. We can augment it. The immune system, it's just some cells. It's just some stuff. We figured most of it out. The audacity of this was predicated on the idea that we were like 10 or 20 years away from it happening anyway. So we needed to prepare everybody for it. But we're not any closer to that goal. And that's because actually that goal is very far away, because of how there is an irreducible complexity as an aspect of biology. No matter which way you point your microscope, no matter which way you point your scanners, you're going to run into something that, okay, now here's where things get pretty shaky. And that's fine. In my mind, that's where the beauty is. But they don't want you to see that beauty. They want you to discard it. They want you to no longer have an appreciation for the sacred. They don't want you to be able to sit out in your backyard with a fire under the trees and be fascinated by the sounds you hear anymore. They want you to be afraid of those sounds. They want you to think of coronaviruses and noroviruses and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease if you think of the sounds of the forest or a herd of deer running by. And these are very simple models that make very, very obvious predictions that never come true. And yet with repetition and an illusion of consensus among witting and unwitting participants, we have this almost wholly constructed mythology that substitutes for reality for us. And it's sustained because we refuse to go outside. We refuse to go camping. We refuse to have people over for dinner and to talk about what reality really is with our children. And instead we let that phone and the iPad and all the smart TVs, now we have it all at our fingertips. So there's what's the point? Obviously what I see there must be real, right? And again, here we go back to what they want you to be afraid of. They want you to be afraid of the AI that's going to get up and stand up behind you, put a gun to your head and tell you to do things, or is going to go on the internet and take over all the computers in the world. They don't want you to think about the AI that's already potentially being used to create counterfeit videos, to create misleading accounts, to game the internet to create a sort of an illusion. That's already very doable, was doable a long time ago because language isn't magic. But this guy and his underlings are all part of, various weaponized piles of money and the networks that they create between them that are vying for governance power. And the intellectual dark web is exactly that. It is a bunch of, people trying to climb the ladder of the elites, trying to be part of the people that are still going to be able to internationally travel when it's over in 10 years. That's what this really is.
But you can tell if someone's lying, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's really important not to be a liar.
How is it even possible that someone can speak all of those sentences in sequence and not understand how ridiculous they sound? How is Lex Friedman on the other side of the table not laughing or spitting out his drink? How do you not see this as the CIA, NSA, whatever you want to, whatever letters you want to put? How can you not see him as wholly part of the system that is manipulating you? Of course he is. And of course he says true things. That's the whole magic of it, right? Sprinkle a little truth in there and makes all these mythologies go down easier.
The political cut I have on the specialization is always that if you analyze the politics of science, the specialization should make you suspicious. It should, because if it's gotten harder to evaluate what's going on, then it's presumably gotten easier for people to lie and to exaggerate, and then one should be a little bit suspicious, and that's sort of my starting bias.
A little bit suspicious. A little bit suspicious. You see, that's where also we get into a gray area here, because people aren't willing to believe that, a little fraud here and a little fraud there. Well, that's the way the system works. People pushing their ideas even past their due date. Well, that's just the way the system works. But the idea that a few papers over the course of a few years with the right words could create the illusion of pandemic potential seems just one step too far for all of these people to calculate. It's fine if it's a gain-of-function virus that, has been endowed with heretofore unseen biological possibilities. But the idea that a bunch of people would get together and try to lie about that possibility, that's crazy. And that's what's pretty phenomenal about Brett and Peter and Eric, is that they all seem very capable of telling us that it's all lies. They all seem very capable of saying that we're way overextended and we don't know what we're talking about anymore, and we got to rein in this thing. But we can't go back to the old days. That's what Brett says. We can't go back to the old days. That's what this man says. Does he have a family? Does he have any vested interest in the future the way that we do with our children? Ladies and gentlemen, intramuscular injection of any combination of substances with the intent of augmenting the immune system is dumb. And I've been saying that for about a year, that exact sentence, and not one other person, no one, not one except for Mike Eden, has ever said anything remotely close to that. Even the most staunch anti-vaxxers somehow or another can't seem to work up the energy to say, well, he's got that right. He says that pretty well. And if you zero in on the second statement, transfection in healthy humans is criminally negligent, it is almost remarkable how many people still can't use that word when I introduced it to the entire world and this entire dissident group in 2020. Almost all the people that we now follow have talked to me personally in face-to-face between 2020 and 2022. Almost all of them. The entire map. They're all listed on my whiteboard over there with connections and arrows like I'm crazy. But I've met them all in person. I've shaken their hand. I've taken selfies with them. They've told me that they love what I do. Can't all be telling the truth. If I actually told the story of what happened to me between 2020 and 2024 and used only first names and pictures, it would encompass almost the entire bulletin board that is the dissident movement of COVID. It's extraordinary, really, that given that simple fact, how many people still can't describe it as succinctly as I can with intramuscular injection of any combination of substances with the intent of augmenting the immune system is dumb. Why does it have to be a spike protein that causes the prion disease? Why can't it just be transfection in general? The use of lipid nanoparticles to carry foreign synthetic RNA into our cells can cause misfolding and cascading terrible things. Why does it need to be a special spike protein with special things in it? Because that's the narrative. Because that's the limited spectrum of debate. That's the Scooby-Doo they've been laying down since the beginning. That's why there were people saying that the virus was causing prion disease. Even as Luc Montagnier published a paper not about the virus, but about the adenovirus vaccines and how they caused prion disease. These people insisted for 2 years on using that paper as evidence that the virus, the spike protein of the virus, was going to cause prion disease en masse, and that we all had to avoid getting it. Because why? Because we didn't want it to go endemic. Like Miss Garrett said the other day, was the worst case scenario. If we don't lock down, if we don't stop spread, the worst case scenario is one of these pandemic viruses will become endemic. Guess who was also really interested in it not becoming endemic for almost 2 years straight? Brett Weinstein. The guy who thought that his bandana helped him, the guy that advocated for harsher and more focused lockdowns. We should have thrown all the old people into old refrigerators. That would have protected them better. This guy and his friends are all involved in some movement to shift us out of our previous order into chaos so that a new order can be imposed. Understand that. You can't take an order and change it into a new order. You need an order, you need a lot of chaos, and then you reorganize it under the begging of or the pretense of a disaster. If we pass this mythology onto our children, that is how they will do it. The dollar will crash, the internet will be off for a year, all supply chains will collapse, immigrants will fight natives, and martial law will be declared. Cities will burn. People will starve. And then they'll reorganize everything, flip the light switch back on, arrest people, deport people, whatever. I don't know. It's not going to be pretty. Quite frankly, in my mind, I don't know what to really say about it. I would rather have a pole shift than I would whatever these people have planned, because at least a pole shift would unite us together, and we could just do whatever we got to do. This isn't about that. This is about something else, much more sinister. It is about trying to take the sovereignty of your grandchildren by getting us to pass along stories that enslave them. And they've been laying these stories down for a long time. I want you to think very carefully. If the people that objected to AIDS as a pathogen were right, even about some things, if the moms that have experienced acute mental destruction of their babies after a vaccine administration and inflammation that follows, or if these people are even remotely right, if Randall Bach is right about Zika virus, if Mark Husatonic is right about how so many of these people are connected all the way back to Stanley Plotkin and these other really old school virologists and vaccinologists, they all go together. And the biology, the model of biology at that size scale that we have been, that we are foisted, it was foisted on us, and now we are being forced to foist it onto our children by constantly acknowledging that a pandemic happened that didn't happen. It's the spread of very bad ideas, and they had these people in place They had these people in place so that these bad ideas would spread, so that people could be corralled, that the cats could be herded, so that no matter where you went, you would always find somebody who could step in front of you. No matter how you blew the whistle, you could find somebody who would step in front of you. And that's what they've been doing since the very, very beginning. Maybe they even stepped in front of Bobby after he went to Germany and spoke. But they have been doing it over and over and over again. And now what we have basically is a group of actors that are in place that still are willing to enforce this. It's extraordinary, really, how many of these MDs that we talk about all the time as being really helpful and thoughtful and on the dissident movement still can't explain that the fundamental model of immunology that was foisted on us at the beginning of the pandemic was central to everybody complying and being panicked. And it went from all the way to the top, where the head of the NIH, Francis Collins, is using this exact cartoon on the NIH director's blog. A cartoon that is an absolute lie. It is not even a approximation of how immunity works. Even if viruses, to some extent, are real entities. Even if all of that cartoon is somewhat accurate, this is not. And we knew that from the very beginning. We could get that from immunology textbooks that predated. This was something that everybody at every major medical school in the United States and in the Western world should have known. Somehow they didn't. Somehow within 3 weeks of reading, I was like, wait, what? Why are we even talking about antibodies? And that's the really fascinating thing about Joe Lee and his extreme mind loss about me on Twitter, which I'm just ignoring because it's obviously an act. Because when he was on my show the first time, we talked about how primarily he wrote to Fauci about the fact that IgG and all the antibodies in your blood can't make it to the mucus. They can't make it into your lungs. So the idea that you're selling seroprevalence as immunity is nonsense. And he was totally right about that. But now he's flipping out on the internet about the idea that I'm ignoring this fancy video that somebody put out where he's talking about how the spike protein floating around with antibodies means that there's two, things on the antibodies. So if you have a spike protein and then the antibody can go like this, then you can make this big chain of stuff. And think about how not too far off, and I mean, it's just a different rearrangement of the toys in this picture, right? And so rather than, again, being focused on all aspects of the nonsense, he went from being focused on the size of circulating antibodies and their inability to penetrate the lung and their inability to be present in the mucus where we really need them to be. That's a great insight. But Mike Yeadon was out extremely early suggesting that T-cell immunity, as was shown by the papers that I was journal clubbing regularly from Stanley, not Plotkin, Stanley Perlman's papers, looking at the original SARS virus, showing in a mouse model of that virus that viral infection, that the T cells were actually the determinant of whether or not the mouse would survive. And with T cells alone, they would survive. And so without really saying it, he basically proved this correlate of immunity as being irrelevant, or at least not primal. And then what happened to Stanley Perlman? Well, he was given a position as a coronavirus expert on the WHO, but then they never really asked him about T-cell immunity. No one really asked him about it. And whenever he was on TWIV, they never really talked about it. It's strange because his whole lab was basically built on these 4 or 5 papers that came out in 2002 or 3, 4, and 5 about a mouse model of coronavirus and how the immune system works. And it's how it's based on, it's incredible, really. And so all the while this was being pushed by Francis Collins and all of the people on the, let's say, skilled TV watchers and skilled Facebook users side, there were all these other people on the internet in the back rooms saying that, oh my gosh, the cardiac damage is going to go crazy. The cardiac deaths are going to go up. The spike protein is really toxic. Oh my goodness, it's going to be amyloid and prion. In 2020, already at the beginning, the same people who said that the furin cleavage site was making this virus the most contagious virus ever, that R naught numbers equivalent to measles were perfectly reasonable to expect, and that furin cleavage site insertion was evidence of a lab leak that later would be confirmed by a leaked grant proposal. Furin cleavage sites for sure. So we have been given an entire model of the world that makes very obvious predictions about the future that's not coming true, that aren't coming true, that don't come true every day. And we're being asked to ignore that incongruency, ignore that lack of validation of this model, and we're supposed to keep accepting the fact that there are bad caves, that there are, bad scientists, there are dumb scientists that are passaging viruses in ferrets, and then now they have all these tools and you can't even see what they did because it's called no-see-em. And so the worst case scenario, everybody agrees.
Speech without friction, which is what we now have. You don't have to print a pamphlet or get a book deal in order to say your piece. That in a cacophonous world, most speech without friction, which is what we now have. You don't have to print a pamphlet or get a book deal in order to say your piece. That in a cacophonous world.
Sorry.
Speech without friction, which is what we now have. You don't have to print a pamphlet or get a book deal in order to say your piece. That in a cacophonous world, mostly what free speech produces is vitriol and personal attacks. And I think that we're all sort of scratching our head. This isn't exactly the future that we had envisaged.
Yeah. On the COVID pandemic.
So they just agreed that free speech isn't really useful anymore. Unfortunately, because of the internet, free speech is just kind of a pain in the ass. Did you hear that? Because that's really where this all comes down to. Now we also have people right now that are purporting to fight for our free speech, and I'm afraid they're not fighting for it in earnest. I'm worried. And so we've got to be very, very, very vigilant about this. Pay attention. If balls get dropped, it might not be because of the bad judges. It might also be because of the not-so-skilled lawyers that are making the wrong arguments or attacking the wrong holes. Please, ladies and gentlemen, realize that this bamboozlement is far from over. These people are not done. The show is not over. Listen very carefully as he recites one half of the limited spectrum of debate, which ironically is now going to be played out by the brothers Weinstein. That's why I titled this stream Weinstein and Weinstein. Listen very carefully. They are going to essentially, Eric is going to essentially take a position which is opposite his brother and give us a limited spectrum of debate where we can feel comfortable arguing.
Which we touched on earlier. Your brother Brett has become a very high-profile part of this debate. We got a clip of him talking about it. Let's listen to this.
I believe we must zoom out if we are to understand the pattern that we are gathered here to explore, because the pattern is larger than federal health agencies and the COVID cartel. If we do zoom out and ask, what are they hiding? The answer becomes as obvious as it is disturbing. They are hiding everything.
So that was to a Senate committee this week.
They are hiding everything, but he's not capable of making the jump that the pandemic was an illusion. And I think you need to see how stark a contrast that is. If you have a person, and I always come back to this because it's very easy for me to imagine the kind of unbridled trust that you have to have if you believe this nonsense. I'm trying to think of an adequate thing, and that's when you're trying to convince somebody that their spouse is cheating on them, and they're absolutely sure, yeah, I know she lies to me about that. I know she lies to me about this. I know he lies to me about that. I know he lies to me about that, but that's okay. He would never lie to me about this. And these people are putting on a little bit of a show, which is trying to make us believe and their viewers believe that they are aware that everybody lies. They are one of the few people who's actually able to admit it honestly because they don't work for academia. Him and his brother are free from the NIH ties, so they can say what they feel. They can say what they think. The world's just not ready for these two geniuses.
What did you make of your brother's appearance there? What do you make of the general debate about COVID as it raged in real time?
Well, first of all, I want to be very clear that whatever Brett's positions are on COVID are his positions.
Yeah.
They are not my positions, and I don't want to be referenced to his positions. Much of what he says is true. But the problem is that when you are so clearly lying about the origins of COVID, its treatment, the reasons for doing things, the science, you open up the question, what exactly is going on and why are we lying about everything? I think the stark difference is that Brett claims that he can figure out much more of that story than I think I can, and I dare say I don't think anyone can.
Nobody can figure it out.
Going to
Nobody
really go after the EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Dash.
Nobody can figure that out. It's funny. Nobody can figure it out. It's so strange. Like, it's just one big mess. Oh, I'm up here. I gotta go out off of this. I think I deactivated this slide somehow. Yeah, nobody can figure it out. Robert Malone said we would never be able to figure it out. Actually, Robert Malone on stage in Stockholm when he was on tour with Meryl Nass and Sasha Latipova was saying that it's fifth generation warfare, and unfortunately we'll never be able to figure it out. You can find that video on Rumble. It's a joke. That's almost verbatim. You know, it's kind of like, well, you just got to accept that this warfare is happening. It's not something we can figure out. Then he played that video from the U.S. government army thing with the ghosts hanging. I mean, come on. It's so obvious to me now, a theater. It's kind of funny. I need popcorn every day.
In terms of the information that organization and that individual holds. And you're not going to discuss Ralph Barrick's lab in North Carolina. You're not going to talk about the private communications inside of NIH with Francis Collins. If you're not going to talk about Anthony Fauci's duties.
So he's not going to talk about the public communication of Francis Collins, where he told a lie about how the immune system works and drilled everybody about how the immune system works so that we would accept a correlate of immunity that was irrelevant as a reference point for which to judge the effectiveness of countermeasures, for which to judge the effectiveness of therapeutics, for which to judge the effectiveness of diagnostic tools. Think about how extraordinary that is. He's just going to skip right over the fact that they could lie about the fidelity of testing. They could lie about the fidelity of over 250 different EUA products that are no longer in existence, but were used to establish the rapid spread of a virus across the United States and the world. They lie about everything, but not that. Those are all high fidelity things. Those 15 million sequences that are those are all real. They would never lie about that. They would definitely lie to cover up the fact that he's already got a geometric unity theory and he's already got figured out why Einstein was wrong. They'll lie about that, but they won't lie about, how, wow. That's extraordinary.
In terms of biowarfare after the Geneva and biowarfare conventions of the 1970s, because presumably this is all about statecraft and extremely secret programs as to why are we in Wuhan talking about inserting fear and cleavage sites and humanizing coronavirus. It's an absolutely terrifying vacuum of knowledge. And I don't think we know why. I think that this very likely we're trying to play 12-dimensional chess and we're barely able to play checkers. And this goes back to the original point about it's an absolutely terrifying vacuum of knowledge. And I don't think
that is a mythology. You see, that's a mythology that's a mythology that Nathan Wolf's book Viral Storm laid down already in 2011. It's a story that is recapped in the book Viral by Alina Chan and Ridley. It's the same story that's in Robert Malone's book. It's the same story that's in the Bregan's book. It's the same story in all of these books. It's a story about human hubris and an RNA molecule that has the right combinations of bases that can just fly around the world and do things that no molecule has ever done before and allow us to track a molecule like we've never tracked one before. And this super genius is able to just kind of play the I'm not a biologist card so that he doesn't have to read a book or understand why that might be pretty fraudulent. He's just able to opt out. And in fact, so many people are opting out that way, just the same way that Peter explained it earlier it's just too much knowledge. You're never going to figure it out. Don't bother starting to read anything. Well, if you're under the pretense that there are lots of books with the truth in it at Barnes & Noble, well, then you got a problem. But if you had the right list of books, there is something to be learned. There are truths to be learned. There are models of reality that need to be further verified, that can be used as handholds to really get to the edge of our understanding. But they are not available for free. That is not what the university system is involved in creating or crafting or building. Not at all. Those are all rituals. Those are all theaters. You know, you might as well put on robes and have candles, because it's that kind of faith that's going on there. And a ritual is being done with these p-values and this falsification of a null hypothesis. These are all rituals that people like Sam Harris are either too ignorant to understand or fully in on the bamboozlement that is Popperian reiterative falsification science. And I understand now how easily that can be. You can be handed that by your elders, by your supervisor, by your trainer, by your teacher. And so it's become ever more obvious to me that that's the only way out, is that we need people teaching these ideas and being able to show how these ideas are so different than the purported thinking that's going on in these areas. Now, I'm not arguing about who's smarter with numbers. I'm talking about who's closer to reality. I'm talking about who understands reality in a way that's worth passing on to our children. And I don't think I want this guy writing children's books for my kids. I don't think so. I think I would rather have a smart guy like, let's say, how about Buckminster Fuller, right? Here's a book called Buckminster Fuller to the Children of Earth. I wonder if this book will be interesting. What would this book say about genetics and genetic modification of children? Buckminster Fuller is a pretty smart chemist guy. This book is falling apart. It's very much falling apart. was given to me by my friend Gail, who I don't think she knew what she was giving me when she gave it to me. She gave me a bunch of books that she thought I would like for my kids. And this book is very, very valuable. There aren't any real copies of it out there anymore. It was written in 1972, which is really cool. That's the year that I was born. Environment to each must be everything that isn't me. Universe in turn must be all that isn't me and me. Well, holy crap, is that the way this book starts? This is very different already if you're going to write a poem about sacredness in the first line of the first book, you know, like showing himself in the clouds as a spirit. Every time man makes a new experiment, he always learns more. He cannot learn less. Well, that's weird because Popperian science says you can't learn anything. You can't prove anything. You just have to falsify stuff. I decided that man, as designed, was designed to be an extraordinary success. His characteristics were just magnificent. Now, if you can feel the pain already that social media has caused your consciousness, that he's choosing to use all masculine pronouns here. Oh my goodness, it hurts, doesn't it? But back in these days, man was the name of the species, not human, but man. It was okay. Really, it was okay. So he says the man's just fine all by itself. We don't need to augment it. We don't need to like figure out how he works down to the letter so that we can change it. He was designed to be an extraordinary success. Oh, there's a picture of a girl though, so he's not unaware that girls exist. He just chooses pronouns funny. And what would be necessary was really to find out what were the great comprehensive patterns operating in the universe. So see, he wants to look at how nature does it and then mimic nature. He doesn't want to rule nature, wants to learn from it. And I think he can sit in awe of nature and learn from it, not necessarily need to blow it up or destroy it or manipulate it. A child is comprehensive. He wants to understand the whole thing, universe. Children will draw pictures with everything in them, houses and trees and people and animals and the sun and the moon. Grown-up says, that's a nice picture, honey, but you put the moon and the sun in the sky at the same time, but that isn't right. But the child is right. The sun and the moon are in the sky at the same time. Child plays with balls that are round like the earth and touches whole things. He touches his mother a lot when he is young, and she is big and sort of round. A child thinks in terms of wholes. Again, we're not talking about something broken. We're talking about something perfect. A child has 1,000 whys. Why is the sky dark at night? Why is the earth round? Why? So why in the world would we ever aim those 1,000 whys that a children has at themselves? Surely that's not what nature intended. Surely that's not what God intended. Goodness sakes, ladies and gentlemen. This is Buckminster Fuller, a chemist. Nobody pays any attention to him. Probably more people know the name Neil deGrasse Tyson. This book is as old as me. Adults are often busy. They don't answer the child's questions, and then the child goes to school and the teacher says, first you're going to learn ABC. The child still wants to understand universe and has big questions, and the teacher says, never mind that. You learn the parts first, ABC. Then the child goes to college and never gets back to the whole. Well, that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? That's what we're talking about here, that academic biologists become ever more specialized and they never get back to the whole. And once they never get back to the whole, they're easily manipulated. They're easily bamboozled. They have an excuse not to understand. It's their job not to understand. Their job was to specialize. The more specialized they became, the better they were at their job. The more easy it was to get funding, the more easy it was to get invitations and publish papers. You don't get back to the whole for a reason. It's the design of the system. What book is that? The book is Buckminster Fuller, To Children of Earth. If you'd have been around in 1972, you could have bought this with your own money for $3.95. These are all photographs that were taken by Buckminster Fuller himself. And it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. If you want to do something good for a child, give him an environment where he can touch things as much as he wants. Montessori school or something like that, maybe. Or Reggio Emilia. Sometimes we should send people fishing. That's the whole page. I can almost start crying how beautiful that is. But you got to be careful when you go fishing, because on the shore there are white-tailed deer and they carry coronavirus. I'm not my hair that grows and gets cut off. I'm not my fingernails. I'm not the food that I eat that turns into cells in my body. Oh, this is getting deep now. This is why you can't augment the immune system with intramuscular injection of a combination of substances, because we aren't the hair that grows and gets cut off. We aren't the fingernails. We are not the food that we eat. We are more than that. We are a pattern integrity. There's a knot with 3 kinds of rope. Man is a pattern integrity. He is like the knot tied in a rope. He is not the rope. I'm going to splice a piece of manila rope to a piece of cotton rope and then splice the other end of the cotton rope to a piece of nylon rope. I'm going to make the very simplest of knots. I know the knot has not done this. The rope has not done this. I have done it to the rope. I can slide this knot along. I slide it along the rope, and now it leaves the manila, and now it's on the cotton. I keep sliding it along, and now it's on the nylon, and suddenly it's off the end. We say the knot was a pattern integrity. It wasn't the manila. It wasn't cotton. It wasn't a nylon. Cotton and nylon and manila, any one of them are good to let us know about its shape, what its pattern was, but it was not that. It had an integrity all its own. That's what life is. We are trying to understand how a pattern integrity, as complex as life can come to exist, and we are pretending that we can augment it by injecting some stuff into the middle of it. Man sometimes thinks like a tree, but he was built to move. That's something else we're not doing anymore. We need to move more. That's why I'm trying to go to the basketball court with my boys every day and not watch them, but actually play, because I need to move too. All anywhere about man, with and without, is eternally ceaseless motion, whether he senses it or not. That's a pretty big statement, right? It's kind of like what Tesla says, that when we start to think in vibration and frequency, we'll start to learn more than we ever have. It seems like a lot of these people, I don't need to keep reading this, a lot of these people were on to some truths a long time ago that we're not on to anymore. We don't even think are real anymore, and it's not right. We are being actively misled. We're being actively misled by people like this.
We know why. I think that this, very likely we're trying to play 12-dimensional chess and we're barely able to play checkers. And this goes back to the original point about, I think it was April of '53 when we figured out DNA, and then 10 years later we had the genetic code with the work of Marshall Nierenberg. It's so much power.
So much power!
The treaties that we've signed are possibly nonsensical. I mean, we have a problem that we don't develop offensive weapons, but defensive measures can be easily converted to offensive measures. We have put restrictions on ourselves that we then attempt to get out of. Almost certainly this has to do with questions that we don't want resolved in public. And I came from, I'm an old man now, at 58, I remember the church hearings, the Pike hearings, the Watergate hearings, the Iran-Contra hearings. We have given up on a taste for actually figuring out who we are, what we've done, what our responsibilities are. And I think that we don't know. Brett may know. I don't think he does. I know that I don't know. And the hearings were the way that we were going to figure this out. And I don't think that we did that in a smart and aggressive fashion.
How do you think the pandemic began?
I don't know. It could be a wet market. It's very unlikely. I think that the diffuse proposal that came out of the EcoHealth Alliance clearly suggests that there's a whole lot of coincidence that was going on in Wuhan, China. But I have to say that, you know, as somebody with a STEM PhD, I'd like to restrict myself first to what I can say. And what I can say is we're not trying to figure it out. I can also say with absolute certainty that the claim coming out of places like the Lancet, that any attempt to figure out the origin of COVID that considered the Wuhan Institute of Virology was necessarily racist was an abomination. The attempt to sign up Nobel laureates in order to make this seem like a respectable position. What was it, like 60 plus Nobel laureates? This is a great danger to science. We cannot spend our credibility covering up for failures of statecraft and 12D chess at a geopolitical level.
So he's using the words 12D chess to describe something that I think people generally call realpolitik, the idea that all these world powers are vying behind the scenes for control, and you know, as part of that, there was a lab leak that was covered up, and so we should just take responsibility. I suspect that he's about to say that, actually, that America should take responsibility if we killed millions of people. I don't know.
I think we have to go back to a world in which we actually get answers, and if we killed a bunch of people by helping the Chinese in their biological laboratories, we're going to have to take responsibility that potentially tens of millions of people are dead through our stupidity. During the pandemic, the science regularly changed as facts changed. That struck me, looking back on it, as a perfectly normal sequence of events, that with a novel virus that would happen. I mean, you
notice that Eric was confused there, right? You see that? He was absolutely confused by that statement, which is that the information about COVID changed because the facts changed. And then Eric says, what does that mean? Listen carefully. Biological laboratories, we're going to have to take responsibility that potentially tens of millions of... Arrgh! Demon. Oh, man. This is really a failure because of that stupid video in the background. Sorry about that. I'm going to keep going here.
And to the fact that they did keep changing their mind about things, from the efficacy of masks, for example, to whether if you had a vaccine, you could transmit the virus and so on.
Of statecraft.
Here we go. Okay.
12D chess at a geopolitical level. I think we have to go back to a world in which we actually get answers. And if we killed a bunch of people by helping the Chinese
that's incredible.
In their biological laboratories, we're going to have to take responsibility that potentially...
I have a slide deck from 2021 at the beginning of the year of 2021 where I say that we are being set up to be blamed for this. And I have slides and everything about how, you know, we're being... America, the country, the people are being set up on the left and the right to come to the same conclusion that we're responsible for it. And so we have to sort of step down as a world leader because of this huge debacle. And in the coming years, we're going to blame a lot of the death and misery that's going to include, I guess, prions and amyloid on America, because America is the one that pushed the pandemic. America is the one that released the virus that killed tens of millions of people around the world. America is responsible for pushing this technology on people. That's what they want to happen. That's what I said they wanted to happen in 2020. And here we have one of the Weinstein brothers basically explaining it. I find it extraordinary because we need to avoid college kids from coming to this conclusion, because that's where this all goes wrong. College kids and adults that are just now starting families under the age of 30 need to be rescued from this mythology. Their kids need to be saved from the vaccine schedule. The teenagers need to be saved from the universities. We need to do it now. And even though he's kind of saying it sometimes, he's not really saying it. He's not saying that kids should stay home, that they should self-educate, that they should get a library card, that they should watch intelligent podcasts, that they should teach themselves a trade. None of those things are being said here. So it's really a lot of hot air. But he was able to succinctly say that the diffuse proposal was evidence that this was a lab leak. He was able to say definitively that everything is a lie except for that. And that's how you can see it's all by design.
Tens of millions of people are dead through our stupidity.
During the pandemic, the science regularly changed as facts changed. That struck me, looking back on it, as a perfectly normal sequence of events, that with a novel virus that would happen. I mean, are you sympathetic to the issues that scientists had and to the fact that they did keep changing their mind about things, from the efficacy of masks, for example, to whether if you had a vaccine you could transmit the virus and so on? Are you sympathetic to that's the fog of war when you're dealing with something like that?
No.
Good answer.
Really? You think it was willful, deliberate disinformation, knowing the facts?
Look, I'm not a biologist.
Oh, come on!
Again, that above 40 IQ, keeps causing me problems. This was obviously two separate things. A small amount of revision in terms of our knowledge as we learned more, and a massive amount of revisions as our policy changed. If you expended too much PPE, personal protective equipment, in a previous administration, and then you failed to follow the admonitions of the literature, which said that you had to be prepared for surges, very sudden needs for a very large amount of PPE, for example.
Wow.
It was very clear that we were being told that masks didn't work at the beginning, in part because we were trying to reserve them for people who were working in emergency rooms. And then we decided that we needed these masks, despite questions about the size of the virus and the width of the mesh of the mask. And then we go back and forth and back and forth. This is a transparent situation in which we're pretending that our reasons for doing something are given by some proxy. I think that what we had was we didn't want to admit that we'd failed to replenish our stock under Obama.
Oh my gosh.
We didn't want to admit that the masks...
Talk about asking the wrong question and then giving an elaborate answer. Oh my gosh. Do you see how the enchantment was done? Imagine that they were doing this already in 2019 and 2018 to prepare us for this, having these CNN documentaries about it, having the movie Contagion being produced, having, look at this, the start of the Planet of the Apes movie where everybody gets wiped out on Earth because of a virus from a laboratory. This guy is regurgitating word for word the comic book explanation for what's going on, yet at the same time, out of the same mouth, he's trying to say that everything else is a lie. We have figured out the truth about this, but everything else is a lie. See how slippery that Scooby-Doo mystery is? We all get cigars and we get to go to the bar and pat ourselves on the back because we more or less figured it out, that they're all really lying to us. And we might disagree about some stuff with regard to the virus, but my brother and I generally agree that this whole system is screwed up. Wow. They're not solving any problems. They're not winning any arguments. They're not winning any debates. They're not asking any relevant questions. And that is the magic.
Weren't necessarily very efficacious. We didn't really have great tools. And as such, we just looked like idiots. And we couldn't ask questions, right? If you look at for example, the PhDs who are outside of the control of the university system, who aren't dependent on NIH grants, who are free, effectively, to ask.
Here he is. And now keep in mind that his eyes are almost always down. He looks at the camera. He's got a great podcast. He's a media dude, but he doesn't know how to look in the camera and say stuff because he's reading it. That's the only way that Eric Weinstein sounds this cogent, is if he's got notes and he reads it. He's a fraud. I don't know if you know, but his geometric unity theory was like thoroughly dismantled by some guy on YouTube, and it was kind of comical actually how he did it. The theory is so funny for one major reason for me, because the theory has something in it called a variable that is called a ship in a bottle. And for some reason or another, no one can really see that what that is bullshit I don't understand. If you give me that there's some bullshit that I don't understand, then my theory makes perfect sense. I mean, imagine if I had a model of how the brain worked where there was a ship in a bottle variable. What is that? Well, it's a thing kind of like a soul, kind of like consciousness that I can't explain. And if you put a ship in a bottle right in the middle, then you connect the cerebellum and the cerebral cortex, then I have a functioning brain here and I can explain a lot of stuff. That's how dumb his geometric unity thing is. It's one of these things where, because so many people are not sophisticated enough to understand, it becomes very easy to lie, exaggerate, and lie. Who said that? Oh, his boss did, Peter Thiel, while he was on his podcast, the second episode in 2019 in August. It's funny how we come full circle on the intellectual dark web. Sam Harris was on Brett's podcast to say that we wouldn't be able to tolerate anti-vaxxers when a real pandemic comes. Yuri Dagan from Drastic was on Brett Weinstein's podcast to talk about his aging company, and also the fear and cleavage site being a good indication of it being a lab leak. Brett Weinstein was a masker and a lockdown advocate, and also an ivermectin advocate as a 100% safe and effective prophylactic. It is extraordinary to see it now. And if you have the wherewithal to see it from a 4-year perspective or a 5-year perspective, and look at what these people were doing then and now and all in between, there can be only one explanation, especially when you put it in the context of what Mike Eden was saying for those 4 years, what Jonathan Couey was saying for those 4 years, what Wolfgang Wodach was saying for those 4 years, what Byram Bridle was saying for those 4 years, what all these people that are not growing on social media, don't have a lucrative Substack, don't have 100,000 followers on Twitter yet, despite 4 years of fighting. That's by design, where there are other people who have come to this fight already, and not until 2023, who have hundreds of thousands of followers, who have a podcast that's doing great, have a Substack that has thousands of followers, that are, it is not explainable by any other means other than artificial elevation, artificial promotion. It is control of the narrative by puppets. Who they are, who's behind them, I don't know. But I think it is something that can be found out. And I think it all has to do with the fact that on every side, there are people who understand that there is a game being played, that the entire scheme of governance around the world is basically based on mythology. They lie about political conflict. They lie about conflicts on the ground. They lie about public health problems and initiatives and crises in order to govern. They lie about terrorism in order to govern. But that one's expensive. That one's hard. That one's messy. That one's got a lot of moving parts. If we just got to get a bunch of people to agree about viruses, that's a lot easier. You don't need any buildings to fall neatly into their footprint. You don't need to pre-plant explosives or have remote control airplanes. You don't need any of that stuff. You just need a test that changes color and people that will insist that that test means something. You just need a database full of sequences and people who will insist that that means something. And then if you look very carefully at the people who are insisting the loudest that those things mean something, it's just immediately like, oh, wow, that's weird. It couldn't be just normal, everyday academic biologists who are doing their best to understand what's going on that get promoted as people who found DNA in the shot. It can't be just average academics that are trying to figure out what's going on that get promoted as transfection being wrong. No, it's got to be somebody who didn't even finish a PhD, but instead took a shortcut through the intellectual property mill of MIT to learn and cooperate with people who were going to do the Human Genome Project, which was really just a restriction enzyme mapping project, which was in no way, shape, or form a sequencing project, even though that's what they said it was. And if you're in on that bamboozlement, if you're in on that lie, that exaggeration, which is what Peter Thiel calls it so eloquently, that lying exaggeration, he starts out as being skeptical. Well, I'm skeptical of the Human Genome Project. I'm skeptical of what they accomplished. I'm skeptical of how much we understand. I'm skeptical of how much we can implement it. And I'm skeptical of the whole database of sequences for a genome that didn't supposedly exist before 2019. But he's not, and Brett's not, and Kevin McKernan is not, and Kevin McCairn is not, and Rixey is not. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not skeptical of it. Robert Malone's not skeptical of it. Tony Fauci's not skeptical of it. Don't you see? It's all the same mythology that they all agree to take sides on so that this limited spectrum of debate seems real. And it's not. That's why you never see Byron Bridle on these podcasts. That's why you never hear Mike Eden on television, why he's never gone anywhere, while Wolfgang Wodach is a fisherman now. Why you never hear anything about me, and I still don't have 15,000 followers on Twitter, not even 15,000. Because there are simple ways to elevate people, there are simple ways to silence people. And they've made big shows about censorship that had nothing to do with the real censorship going on. Because that's only half the equation. The other half of the equation is that everybody seems to have seen Robert Malone by now. Everybody seems to have seen Thomas Rentz by now. Everybody seems to have seen all of these people who really have no business being seen by everyone. And this is another one that's been seen by a lot of people that has no business being seen by anyone other than the fact that he hangs out with rich people and that his dad probably has information that rich people need.
Questions. We were supposed to be the representatives of ordinary Americans who wanted answers to these questions. And we were all denigrated. We were told that we were, I don't know, crazy people, conspiracy theorists, et cetera, et cetera. You look at the trajectory of Jeffrey Sachs, who was put on this commission to investigate these things. He appointed all of these people from inside the system, and he realized that he'd hired wolves.
I mean, think that he's even perpetuating this idea that Jeffrey Sachs was a good guy, and he hired a bunch of people to investigate it, and then only later figured out that, wow, I mean, Peter Daszak's a bad guy, and all these people have conflicts of interest. I guess I should have picked somebody else. And then Jeffrey Sachs went on Bobby's podcast, and supposedly Jeffrey Sachs even talked in private to Kevin McCairn and Charles Rixey and a few other people just some random weekend in 2022. Because, you know, he thought he had to take time to talk to them. And the only reason why I wasn't on that call, because I was camping that weekend. Otherwise, I guess I would have been able to even talk to Jeffrey Sachs. This guy who has no interest in global governance, no conflicts of interest with global governance organizations or people or weaponized piles of money. None at all. Let's just overlook all of that and present Jeffrey Sachs as a reasonable guy trying to do a reasonable job of figuring out what's going on, and they screwed him over. I mean, come on. It's hilarious how obvious this is.
And foxes to guard hen houses. This is a crazy situation. We need to give our scientists FU money, and we need them to tell us the truth.
You need to give me FU money. That's what we really need. We need people like me to have FU money so that I can help Jessica Hockett do what she needs to do with her findings and get it out there, so that we can help Mark Kulak fortify his website and his work. We need him to have FU money. We need to have me have FU money. I'm sorry, that's how we win. I'm going to be so bold as to say that, because right now the work that I'm doing, the work that Mark's doing, the work that Jessica's doing is some of the most important work out there, because it is actually pushing back on the relevant points of weakness. If we're not pushing back on the relevant points of weakness, we're not asking the right questions. Therefore, we're not operating with the right model. We're not making the right predictions. We're not moving forward in the right direction. And that's what these people's job is. That's what Kevin McCairn's job was from day one. That's what Paul Cottrell does. That's what George Webb does. He's got to be the master of making people ask all the wrong questions. But there's a lot of people out there whose job is to do that. And it is running out the clock on our grandkids. That's all they're doing. They know something's coming. They know that some massive change is coming, and that if enough people aren't awake when that occurs, then it's basically time over, game over, time out, over, zero, whatever the word is. T-minus null, null, null. I don't know when that's coming. I don't know if that's 2050 or 2025. But I do know that there is an urgency here. I do know that my 14-year-old son came home yesterday, and we were riding back from the gym and just randomly talking about things. He says, yeah, I got a lot of classes with a lot of girls, and now they keep joking around about how they're going to convert me. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're going to make me into a girl. And it's not this, it's this trans thing they're talking about. It's this idea that that's even possible. It's a strange and dark world that we are in right now, and it is up to us, each and every one of us, to pull our heads out and pull our kids out and get out of this nosedive.
And I don't think it was that the science was changing. I think that the idea is something terrible happened, and we weren't honest about it.
You have been called the new Einstein.
The new Einstein!
Because you have the theory of relativity. You have the theory of everything. It's complex, the theory of everything, but what's the simple layman version of it?
That Einstein was, well, first of all, I mean, it's a very kind introduction. I'm happy to just be myself. Effectively, that you're looking at something that's extraordinarily simple. That Einstein's theory, if you will, began with 4 degrees of freedom, which you can think of as any 4 degrees of freedom, like treble, mid, bass, and reverb on an amp. Then what he did was he took the 4 degrees of freedom and he said, let's put 3 rulers and 1 watch as measuring devices and 6 protractors to measure the angles between all of those 4 objects. And he called that space-time. That space-time object is not where I believe we live. We actually live on top of all of those extra rulers, watches, and protractors, and we are played back in this 4-dimensional space. So imagine that you have a record on a phonograph. Imagine that that record was, in some sense, 14-dimensional data. The stylus was Einstein's space-time metric, and the gramophone is the 4-dimensional world that you perceive. That is, in essence, where I believe we are. I believe that we are looking at a 14-dimensional world. Effectively, you think you're living in 4 dimensions, but you're playing back a 14-dimensional world versus...
Remember what Peter Thiel said in that earlier video, that the string theory stuff or whatever, it's just way out there, and there's no progress being made. We're not getting anywhere. And a lot of physicists will agree as well. It's just absolute ridiculousness. And because they can't test it, that's their excuse. There's no way to do it. So, well, we're just kind of stuck with this, and we have to draw it on a chalkboard and ever increasing variations. That's it.
Yeah, Einstein's metric, and you're getting confused. How is it that you have Schrodinger's cat both dead and alive? Well, how is it that on the Doors' first album you have both Break On Through to the Other Side and Light My Fire, but you don't hear them both at once? You don't think of that as a paradox, and I think that in part we have all of these crazy log jams because we think we're living on a four-dimensional manifold.
So for people who are scientifically illiterate like me, what is your plan to resolve this?
What was that?
Sooner
what
or
was
later,
that?
The string theorists will retire and die.
What was that cup?
And you don't think of that as a paradox.
What the hell was that cup?
We have all of these crazy log jams because we think we're living on a four-dimensional manifold.
So for people who are scientifically illiterate like me, what is your plan to resolve this?
What is that cup?
Sooner or later, the
he did that on purpose. Why would he do that? Why would he do that?
And
that's not on accident. That's on purpose.
Effectively, what you have is one group of very brilliant, very smart people who refuse to follow scientific ethics. They won't consider other people's work. They name everything after themselves. They absorb everything into their worldview. And they've made science impossible, much the way biology was made impossible under COVID. And what I thought I would do is I'd start a podcast. I'd grow an enormous channel. I think I'm the mathematician with the largest following in the world.
Yeah.
And
he's the mathematician with the largest following in the world, and he grew a big channel. Boy, he grew a big channel. I hope I can grow a big channel someday. That would be great to grow a big channel. I wonder if how my channel grows is the same way his channel grows, or if his channel grows more like a Viagra kind of thing. I don't know. It's weird. I just hope I grow a big channel.
The entire point of that is to make sure that they can't do to me what they did to me before, which is to drown me out and use the official channels. So I'll use the unofficial channels. In fact, the intellectual dark web came about because I'd spotted that podcasts were far more powerful than anyone in traditional media had thought. And so what I did was I tried to aggregate a few people with mega channels and a lot of voices that needed amplification. And
do you really think it was him? Really? Or do you think it was his boss with all the money? The one that sits at the top of a weaponized pile of money that was like investing in antibody companies in Canada right before the pandemic and, all that stuff, intellectual property stuff. You know that guy? Gee whiz, what are we even talking about here? His podcast started, his first guest was Peter Thiel. Come on!
Wrap a kind of a concept or a brand around it. Right now, the legacy media doesn't know why it's dying. And what I intend to do is to use a large channel to become even larger. And apparently I jumped the gun a little bit. I think that, unfortunately...
What kind of metaphors are going on here? He grew his channel too big and it was too early? Like what?
And what I intend to do is to use a large channel to become even larger. And apparently I jumped the gun a little bit. I think that, unfortunately, this university system that holds back new ideas, and I mean scientific ideas, and it is still too powerful. This thing that we just saw with Claudine Gay, however, is a huge, it's a huge window of hope that's opening, because if I had told you before that the president of Harvard was completely unqualified for that office, and that person might be a plagiarist, that might have sounded completely fanciful. You might have thought I was crazy.
Well, the fact that she lost her job for it is actually would have sounded crazy, because you would have thought that
No. She's still employed as a professor.
Right, but she lost her job as the president of Harvard, right?
Absolutely. But what I'm trying to say is, when you find out how corrupt our universities are and how much amazing work is still being done within them, you'll be ready to listen to geometric unity. But you're not there yet. Right now, you're in the process of figuring out that Harvard isn't Harvard, MIT isn't MIT, and I sure hope that Oxford and Cambridge are still themselves. They have a little longer in the tooth and maybe a little bit more history under their belt.
So that's interesting because there he's trying to be coy about it, but he's saying that the United States is lost, but maybe England is still all right. Whoa, that really strikes me the wrong way because I really feel like England is at the heart of the city of London is at the heart of the power that is dismantling and destroying the Republic of America. And so if you think of the crown and these other, other protectorates of the crown that all use Queen Elizabeth or the king on their money, those countries are being used, weaponized against America. And we are being turned against them on purpose to try and create the confusion that's necessary to, as much as possible, control, demolish the American system and economy. He's aware of that. He's aware of that because Peter Thiel is aware of that. Brett Weinstein is aware of that because their dad is aware of that. Their dad has been walking the halls of power since the John F. Kennedy administration. His dad was appointed to the Department of Justice by JFK and served under RFK's dad, RFK Jr.'s dad. These people are connected to the highest levels of power and have been for a generation or more. And they are now trying to play their role that he's so aptly described as they realize that podcasts have a lot of power. So we're going to have to put some controlled people in the podcast space. Let's do that, says Peter Thiel. I can do that, says Eric Weinstein. I've got a brother, says Eric Weinstein. Oh, that's right. Well, at least I like your dad. Go ahead and see what you can do. Here's Joe Rogan and a couple other dudes. And look who has risen throughout the pandemic to be vocally outspoken. It's Rubin, it's Shapiro, it's Rogan. And who did these people all come out on? Who did Malone come out and McCullough and everybody that they were going to release and get to allow to rise in the system went through all these portals. And when you look back in 4 years and you see all of these things line up, yeah, it was hard to see when you were experiencing it, but when you look back and you see that they all line up, you must accept that parsimonious conclusion that this was already a planned exercise. This was a theater. And to the extent to which that they know they're participating, they have to. In 2024, they have to know. Maybe at the start of the pandemic, they were terrified by secret meetings, terrified by secret visits, terrified by secret emails. I don't know. But at some moment, they knew that they were part of a governing narrative. They knew they were part of a national security operation, which is designed to govern America by governing the world, by the same principle that is in that first slide that we talked about that I steal from Vera Sharav. The quote from Edward Bernays, that the organized manipulation of the opinions and habits of the masses is a central mechanism by which we are governed. And these people participate in it. Elon Musk participates in it. And so if you want to shed these shackles, the first thing you need to understand is that this window into reality is a lie. This is a stage. All the world has become a stage because of how we've accepted this cell phone and internet as our window to the world. Instead of still going to scout meetings and basketball practice and choir, we're not doing that anymore. We need to go back to that, where these people aren't allowed to lie to us every night on our phone.
But right now, it's important to purge the universities of everything related to diversity, equity, inclusion, plagiarism. We need to get rid of a lot of these activist subjects that were maybe founded with the best of intentions in the late 60s. and we need to return to rigor, scholarship, and above all, collegiality with enough money that professors do not fear. If they don't sign a loyalty oath, they don't need to worry about walking to campus that they're going to be attacked. Right now, what we need is something like a civil war in the universities, and the right side has to win.
I realized we'd reached an absolute.
Don't you see how that's perfect? Don't you see how perfect that is?
I can't remember which one.
If the adults fight, that doesn't really work. They don't want fighting in the streets. They need the young people, the ones that go bananas, the ones that you occasionally see in those little YouTube videos where people just lose their mind and start screaming. Those are the people they want to use. They want those people to fight, those people to cause violence, those people to burn buildings. That'll be the excuse. We'll be too busy at home. The internet will be out. The internet will come on just in time to show us that, then it'll go out again. I don't know. I see it coming. I see who he's lying to. What is that cup? I can't believe I accidentally stopped it there. That's perfect. What is that cup? Why is he using that cup? What does that mean? There's no way in hell, absolutely no way in hell you can convince me that that's just the cup that he happened to be using for this interview. A red circle. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it is, but it's weird.
25 years had delivered a lecture about the use of offensive language in modern society. And as part of the lecture, he used examples of offensive language. And he was reported by students.
I don't want my teeth to stain, so I have to have some water after my coffee.
Using offensive language, and he was fired. Even though the whole point of his lecture for a quarter of a century had been how you navigate the use of offensive language in society. And at that point, I realized we had literally lost our minds. I mean, the idea that a university professor would be hounded out of his job for giving a lecture about a subject where the students had just willfully, deliberately misused the use of the offensive language to get him out of his job seemed to me extraordinary.
University is not kindergarten. It is important to become intolerant of people who are not tolerant themselves. That will sound like a paradox to some. We have no time.
Okay, so now he's going to say things that are true, of course, right? He first lays down the model of reality that he wants you to accept, and then now he's going to pile on a bunch of general statements that are true in a broad sense, but he doesn't apply them to all things and to all situations, and that's why the contradiction exists. And so listen carefully as he explains this, because it's really a thorough bamboozlement.
Time for that. It is very important to restore collegiality, academic freedom, freedom of speech, and a lot of people don't belong in university, and we need to practice exclusion rather than inclusion in their case. I don't know how to say this. This idea, this vogue that we have for things that sound good but make no sense, has to be purged from the system by the adults. Otherwise, there will be no adults.
He's reading.
I want to end very quickly, Eric. I've got 10 things. I want to give you the opportunity to give me a statistical probability of these things happening. So you can choose any percentage you like, okay? But you got to answer quickly. No. It's rapid fire.
No. Yeah, I decline.
You can't do that?
No.
Really? Why?
Because it's going to be extremely low quality. I live on the internet, and I'm quite serious. There's a vogue for trying to get people to answer all questions. I didn't particularly want to answer a question about my brother's views on COVID because why? I completely supported him with respect to ivermectin and the idea it wasn't horse dewormer, but I completely disagreed with his ivermectin maximalism. And the internet can't maintain a distinction like that, you see. In other words, to the ivermectin army, Brett was a genius for realizing that ivermectin was a near perfect prophylactic, which I didn't believe. On the other hand, to people who were buying the official line, I was killing people by suggesting that ivermectin was a replacement. So every time you ask...
so he's kind of outlining it quite well about how this limited spectrum of debate creates people arguing about nonsense. He's able to almost adequately describe how he saw his brother being on one extreme and this and the other, and then it's just not useful anymore. But he can't seem to apply that model to virology. Can't seem to apply that model to pandemics. Can't seem to figure out, because he's not a biologist, that transfection isn't a vaccine. He can't even figure out, I mean, this guy could not fight his way out of a wet paper bag using this rationale, using this logic. And yet it's the way that he delivers it that gets it to go. It's just a spectacular commitment to lies.
I think there are a number of questions.
I'll let him finish there because it is kind of a funny end.
Low quality people on the internet, many of whom are bots probably, not even humans, that dog you with everything that you say. So the reason that I don't accept what you're saying is that I don't want 3 weeks of pain in my life that I'm an idiot for giving those probabilities.
That's actually a brilliant answer. Eric Weinstein, it's been
Really
a pleasure
appreciate
talking
that.
to you. Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed it.
So he
Chris.
doesn't
Thanks for having
want
me.
to give
care.
the probability of anything, but he's certain about certain things. And that's where you see through it. Anybody that's certain they know what happened, is finally sure they figured it out, is full of it. And whenever you hear someone like Kevin McKernan trying to say that Jay doesn't know what he's talking about because he says this, this, and this, he's absolutely, positively, as hard as he can, working to misrepresent what I've said. Because I've never committed to one particular thing. I don't know what happened. I do know that what they say happened, which is that a small quantity of an RNA was trackable as it spread around the world over 5 years, and we're still tracking it now, and there are 15 million odd sequences on a database which are evidence of it. The insistence on that being just a high fidelity signal that we've all got to accept like a deck of cards, there are 52 of them, get ready, here we're playing, is ridiculous. And the people who are insisting on it have all crossed paths with me, have all talked to me before, all know that that's not really a legitimate position to take. And the people who have been kind of on the right side of it from the very beginning are still really insistent not to talk to me about it because I'm an idiot, because I used to work for RFK, because I must be controlled now, because I'm controlled opposition, because I finally figured out that there are no viruses, but I'm not really saying that. You see how this works? It's a continuous obfuscation to run out the clock to make sure that you and I and us don't become one movement where we're waking up young people and reuniting the United States under a sort of respect, a reverence for the sacred. They don't want that. They can't have that. That would be the end of this. And I actually believe that it will be the end of this. No matter what happens going forward, no matter what lights they throw out, no matter what currencies they crush, no matter how high gold goes or how high Bitcoin goes, it's all going to come down to that. That there will be a community of people who won't accept that reality, that model of reality that will be foisted on us, and will be there to shed light on it, to make sure that young people who are awake and willing will turn away from this forever. And that will be a new beginning. That will be a new, exciting beginning for the country and for the world. But every nation is going to have to do this on their own. It may even be that every community, every family has to do it on their own first. Maybe that's the bottom-up approach that is necessary here to overcome some of this, because it's not going to be expertise. Because listen, they still don't get it.
I think there are a number of questions in there. At one scale, expertise seems to be broken. Credentials are broken because the institutions are broken. Degrees don't mean what they should, maybe what they used to, but they certainly don't mean what they pretend to mean now. So in lieu of expertise, relevant experience, perhaps? Now, that may be just kicking the can down the road. How do we define relevant experience? If we can, it feels to me like agreeing that the credential is not a good proxy for relevant experience. Let's establish that as an assumption, which still a lot of people have not agreed to. Still degrees from Harvard and Stanford and Yale, seem to mean something to people, even as we see the utter garbage that's coming out of these institutions at the faculty and administrative level. And if the faculty and administrations are broken and confused, why do we expect the students to be less broken or confused as they graduate from those institutions? So what does relevant experience mean? Why is it that an excellent plumber doesn't require a degree in plumbing for you to trust him to come into your house, but an excellent doctor does? And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some different kind of system to establish whether or not a doctor should be someone that you trust, but I'm not sure that those standards as they exist are what they should be, right? We know that plumbing is learned from real experience with the physical world, what happens under different systems. And
they might be savable. You could be very optimistic and think that Brett and Heather are aware but unaware that these problems have been identified as being Popperian falsification, have being the null hypothesis testing nonsense that have allowed these expertises to build up, that have allowed this illusion to be created. You could think that they might be saved by it, but they won't be saved by it because she doesn't understand that the models aren't being verified. There is no model verification behind the generation of knowledge anymore. That's what's missing. That's what's not there. That's what they apparently can't see.
They should be, right? We know that plumbing is learned from real experience with the physical world.
Real experience with the physical world. Plumbing is learned. Plumbing is the application of models of the real world that work. Predictions, if you do it like this, it will work. This is what real knowledge is. And what she doesn't seem to see, maybe we can bring them to understand that what is created on the academic biology bench, the academic chemistry bench, the academic physics bench, isn't always the same level of knowledge that's expressed in carpentry, that's expressed in plumbing, that's expressed when an electrician does their job right. So she kind of gets it, but she doesn't. Because it's the way that those models are verified on a daily basis and the punishment and the incentive for changing those models if they don't work. Plumbing that doesn't work gets punished. Models of how plumbing should be put together that don't work get punished. They get eliminated. They get revised. That doesn't happen with models of autism. That doesn't happen with models of disease in mice. Those models that don't make predictions that go into the future and are never verified because they are used as straw men in a straw man exercise, a ritual, that's the problem. She's right there, but she's not even close. And she might very well be an unwitting participant in this, while her husband, he's almost certainly in on it. He might not know everything. He might not be clever enough to understand everything, but he's sat at the table with those people. He for sure has sat at the table with those people as they talked about how they would contribute to the governance of our society. And so he knows that there is a bamboozlement happening there. He knows that there is obfuscation occurring. She might not know. It's hard to say.
What happens under different systems? And the fact is that used to be doctoring was the same thing. To what degree does that need to have changed because our technological advances have put what doctoring is outside of the scope of what any human being can actually observe? And to what degree is doctoring now something that doesn't have a lot to do with diagnosis because it serves interests that are neither yours nor your doctor's?
Pretty good.
And if it's the latter, then we've got a problem. And if it's the former, well, let's remember that actually our bodies still exist at precisely human scale, ipso facto. And therefore, there should still be a lot of room for actual diagnosis between patient and doctor at the very real human scale that we exist at. And that has almost disappeared in favor of the high-tech, you can't understand, I'm the expert, trust me on this, level, which obviously is sending a lot of people to
Not a lot of
early
nodding.
sickness and early graves.
Not a lot of nodding.
If you
there.
like this clip,
Oh man, this guy drives me nuts though. Not a lot of nodding there. It didn't really feel like he was in total agreement. He didn't look at her while she was talking or anything like that. It was very much like a Zuckerberg Chan vibe there. Look, if consensus replaces predictive value, then science becomes nonsense. That's Greg Glassman talking. That's Jeff Glassman talking. That's Stove talking. That's a lot of different people over the years speaking to how Paparian, reiterative, falsification of null hypotheses has led us nowhere and created a lot of noise that people like Peter Thiel use code words like knowledge to cause real havoc, to cause real confusion. And if we want to escape this, we need to teach people how to think about these ideas correctly. We need to teach people how to think about epistemology and generation of knowledge correctly. And I think that's how I've come to understand the Broken Science Initiative and what it can do for all of us. Not necessarily all of us, but any of us. Not necessarily everyone, but anyone can learn this idea set, can learn these concepts and see clearly why these people are mistaken.
The political cut I have on the specialization is always that if you analyze the politics of science, the specialization should make you suspicious. It should, because if it's gotten harder to evaluate what's going on, then it's presumably gotten easier for people to lie and to exaggerate, and then one should be a little bit suspicious, and that's sort of my starting bias.
And we should have started there already in 2019, at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, but we didn't, because we were all put on our heels. We were all terrified, and there was an illusion of consensus about this virus going around, and whether or not it was dangerous or not was the only questions we had to answer. Where it came from was a question we had to answer. Who's lying about it was a question we had to answer. And by answering or trying to answer those questions, we accepted the existence of the virus in the first place. And that caused the terror and the confusion and the frustration and the doubt and the fear that led almost everyone to conform. But it was an illusion of consensus that was also created by people like the Weinsteins and their podcasts, and Rogan and their podcasts. It's a limited spectrum of debate, and it's a very vigorous debate within it. That's what Joe Rogan is. That's what Brett Weinstein is. That's what all of these people who have come to have hundreds of thousands of followers and a lucrative Substack are doing to us. They are outlining and reinforcing a limited spectrum of debate which will never question the novel virus, will never question how many people actually died of it, will never question the genetic data about the spread of it. They will never question the real usefulness of transfection. Obviously, in the future is still going to be great, even if this one wasn't perfect and it's contaminated or adulterated. And these bad ideas are spreading very rapidly on all sides of the aisle, and they are encompassing us in what I say is a new world order based on viruses that come from bat caves and laboratories. And if we allow this past to fade into the mist, if we allow the truth of 2020 in New York City and elsewhere to be erased, if we allow that erasure of that to be forgotten, then the lie will become truth. And I believe a lot of these people were wittingly or unwittingly are involved in that lie becoming the truth. If we are not absolutely on our toes and working as hard as we can, we will lose. And this illusion of consensus will win. Our children will believe it, and the next time they pull the trigger, they will be helpless. The way that they did it was they seeded this gain-of-function narrative already decades ago in private meetings and in also publications. That's 1 and 2. Then they had a team worst-case scenario in place and a narrative in place with the yin and the yang stories. With stories about molecular signals that matter, with rumors and retracted papers, all designed to generate a fervor to solve the mystery of the novel virus, which could be a worst-case scenario of killing billions of people. Everybody that was read in was actually involved in a national security operation, therefore they can't really tell you what they know. and the transfection gets confounded with the spike protein, and now we know nothing, and these guys say that everything worked. And as far as Paul Offit or Robert Malone are concerned, we don't need to talk about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We don't need to talk about the overuse of pulse oximeters and supplementary oxygen. We don't need to talk about do not resuscitate orders or ventilation or either the lack of antibiotic use or the poor use of steroids. We don't need to talk about remdesivir or midazolam. We don't need to talk about the opioid deaths rising. We don't need to talk about death certificate fraud or financial incentives that greatly increase the numbers, or we don't need to talk about the track and trace that waste millions of dollars. We don't need to talk about all that stuff contributing to the illusion in our schools. We don't need to talk about PCR fraud or lateral test flow fraud or any of the sequencing likely being fraud, because that would be ridiculous. That would break the illusion. And the illusion cannot be questioned. You're not going to ever hear any of these people say we should just restore strict liability to all pharmaceutical products. You're never going to hear these people say that the CICP or the VICP, these are violations of our Seventh Amendment rights. You're never going to hear really any of these people, except for Mike Eden, except for me, and a few other tiny, tiny people saying that there's zero epidemiological evidence of spread. Because that's a limited spectrum of debate that we're not allowed out of. This is a limited spectrum of debate we're not allowed out of. And so first we were on the road. I'm going to escape here and start again. First we were on the road all alone. And then unfortunately we got picked up by people like Larry Brilliant, and driven around in the car and told us stories about lab leak, told us stories about bat caves, told us stories about diffuse proposals, told us stories about USAID and CIA, told us stories about bat cave viruses bat caves being sprayed with furin cleavage site laced viruses. And those stories have solidified this idea in our head. Not any different than the idea that James Giordano explained in 2017, seed a few cases and the rest is his internet history. Well, what does he mean by, and the real bug we use is the internet. What does he mean by that? Well, this picture right here explains it. The internet is not posts. The internet is people. People that are artificially amplified and put in front of more people than other people, so that the collective consciousness of the world accepts the scenario of a pandemic. The collective consciousness of the world has accepted a pandemic because these people were artificially promoted. All of them. And you shouldn't see it any different than this. It's all the same kind of promotion. It's all the same internet. The internet is the real bug they use. And so you don't need to be afraid of the AI. You need to be afraid of simple programming that puts the Tommy podcast at the top of Rumble. You need to be afraid of simple programming that put Robert Malone in front of too many people instead of Bobby Kennedy, or instead of Peter McCullough, or instead of Nick Hudson, or instead of me, or instead of Mikey Eden, Wolfgang Woda. Even Sukrit Bhakti is doing a pretty good job overall, although he does still think there was a deadly virus. That's where we are, ladies and gentlemen. I hate to say it, but they're still pulling this off. They're still faking stopping and starting the train. They're still faking it. They're still talking about almost all this stuff and not talking about all this stuff. They're still ignoring Jessica Hockett. They're still ignoring the huge, stories that Mark Kulak has put out. They're still ignoring the best messages of Nick Hudson. We're still not talking about this hydroxychloroquine ivermectin fiasco and the idea that all these weirdos were promoting it so early with such certainty. It just doesn't make any sense, except as a reinforcement mechanism for the novel virus, for the pandemic. And now we have double-stranded DNA contamination going to get the scapegoat award, so that transfection for RSV and pneumonia can be continued to roll out. They're gonna use transfection for flu virus. You'll see. And they won't maybe even tell you that they're using mRNA for that. How wonderful would that be? And the diffuse proposal, again, is just out there circulating while people complain and talk about it and argue about it. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Asking the wrong questions, you accept the model that is implicit in the question. That's why all these things work. That's how they did it. You asked the wrong question for years, afraid of the wrong things for years, and the virus and the transfection are compounded, and we think that the pandemic proved the transfection was successful. It's not the case at all, of course. And the pandemic was created for lots and lots of reasons, a coordinated shift, and it's coming, so we have to be prepared for it. We need to take our children back. We need to take their consciousness back and explain what's going on so that they can see it in real time while all the evidence is still available, and while it's still okay for us to share it on the semi-free internet, which includes federated sites like stream.gigaohm.bio and gigaohm.bio. We cannot let them get on this train, ladies and gentlemen. It's about to pull out. The faith in the novel virus train is about to pull out of the station with our kids on it, with our college-age kids on it, maybe even with some of our grandparents on it, and they are going to take the coming RNA. They are going to take the coming sequencing reactions, the new diagnostics. They're going to follow everything, all the directives. They're not going to be ready for non-compliance when it's necessary, so we've got to do the work now. We got to explain to people that we've been bamboozled over many, many decades. We've got to explain to people that cancer is a racket, that AIDS was a racket, that COVID is now a racket, that flu was a racket, that didn't really work very well. We have to explain all of this to them, to our children, to our grandparents, to our neighbors, to our school board. We need to stand up for the truth. We need to stand up for a reverence for the sacred that is our children's bodies, our children's lives, and our coming grandkids. They have lied to us about what happened in 2020. They have lied to us about a circulating pathogen. They've lied to us about it for going on 5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot allow the faith in a novel virus to continue. We must end it. The only way to end it is to be honest about it, to be honest about how we were all fooled, how we all bought into it. We need to admit it, that we have no data, so we don't know, but it's probably a conflated background signal. It was always there, and they're lying to us about it. The way out is biology. The way out is opposition to the vaccine schedule. The way out is playing basketball, exercise, eating right, having chickens, whatever. We need to get back to the basics, ladies and gentlemen, and take care of ourselves and our kids. I love you very, very much. Thank you very much for supporting this work. Thank you very much for understanding how it is important it is. I cannot stress enough how the coming couple of weeks are really going to show you what we planned and what we are doing and why this is so vital. Get ready to learn about prions. Get ready to learn why all of this nonsense about prions is indeed nonsense. Get ready to learn and review a little bit more about the lipid nanoparticle. Get ready to do a deep dive in virology, what it is and what it isn't. Get ready to do all this work that needs to be done so that our kids can be woken up. We need content. We need PDFs that simplify it. We need slide decks that simplify it, and Gigaohm Biological is going to do it because we're going to crack the New World Order. We're going to break this bull because we're not going to turn over our thinking to machines, because all we're doing is allowing these people to enslave us with this mythology. We're allowing our kids to be enslaved by this mythology. We need to rescue them. We need to do it now. Ladies and gentlemen, please stop all transfections in humans because they are trying to eliminate the control group by any means necessary. This has been Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist where these three things are true. Intramuscular injection of any combination of substances with the intent of augmenting the immune system is dumb. Transfection in healthy humans is criminally negligent, and viruses are not pattern integrities. Thank you very much for joining me. You can find me there. You can also support me there. If you have the means, please do so, because we are running on fumes at this point. The Couey family is not getting rich from this. I can guarantee you that. So anybody that can support, please take the time to sign up and do so. That would really be appreciated. GigaOhmBiological.com and Substack and other places you can find me. Whatever it is that you want to use to support, and whatever little bit you can give would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, these are the guys. I think tomorrow we're going to watch Leo Biddle, who was on the TNT radio podcast and was interviewed about the pandemic, and I think it was a really good interview. I copied it already, and I just haven't gotten around to it. So I think tomorrow I've got a gap, so I might use that as the show tomorrow. Otherwise, some other special thing. Thanks very much for joining me. Again, this has been a production of the Independent Bright Web. I consider a few other people a part of that as well. So please support Mark Husatonic. Please support Jessica Hockett by subscribing to her Substack and retweeting her tweets. I know that this illusion of consensus can be broken. I know it can be broken. It can be broken by the biology. The truth is just not available on TV, and don't think that it is. That's the illusion that they have us trapped in, that the truth is actually available on TV, and it's really not. Thanks for joining me, guys. Thomas Binder will be on Tuesday. Is that what day it was? Hold on. Let me look at the schedule really quick, as long as you're still here and asking. I already rescheduled it, and I think I already put it in my calendar. Scanning next week. It is Thursday the 28th. Thursday the 28th. Thomas Binder will be on next Thursday. Thank you very much for joining me. See you guys again tomorrow.